Behind the thick concrete walls of America's most isolated Supermax prisons, there is a daily ritual that happens with mechanical precision. It is not recreation. It is not conversation. It is not movement. It is food. But calling it food may already be misleading. In a place designed to erase human contact, meals are not about taste, comfort, or even nourishment in the way most people understand it. They are about control, about routine, about reminding the person on the other side of the steel door exactly where they are and who holds the power. Every day, without seeing another human face, without touching another person, inmates inside Supermax prisons receive their meals through a narrow metal slot cut into a solid steel door. The slot opens. A tray slides in. The slot closes. The sound echoes down the tier like a lock snapping shut on time itself. For many prisoners, this moment, lasting only a few seconds, is the closest thing they will have to human interaction all day. There are no communal tables, no cafeteria noise, no smell of cooking drifting through hallways, no choice, no voice, just a tray, a cell, and silence. This is not accidental. Supermax prisons were built to isolate, to control, and to neutralize individuals considered too dangerous, too disruptive, or too uncontrollable for the general prison population. Inside these facilities, prisoners often spend 22 to 24 hours a day alone in a concrete cell roughly the size of a parking space. Everything that enters that cell, light, sound, movement, and food, is carefully regulated. Food becomes part of the architecture of punishment. The meals served inside Supermax prisons are standardized, repetitive, and stripped of individuality. Breakfast might be a small portion of cereal, powdered milk, and a piece of bread. Lunch could be a processed meat substitute, beans, or pasta. Dinner often mirrors lunch with slight variations. Portions are calculated, calories are measured, and costs are minimized. Flavor is irrelevant. Satisfaction is unnecessary. The goal is not enjoyment. The goal is compliance. For the men eating these meals alone, day after day, the psychological impact goes far beyond hunger. Food becomes one of the only remaining markers of time. Breakfast means morning still exists. Dinner means another day has passed. When nothing else changes, no scenery, no conversation, no physical touch, meals become the clock. But what happens when even that clock begins to feel meaningless? Former inmates have described how the monotony of Supermax food slowly wears down the mind. The same textures, the same colors, the same taste, or lack of it. Weeks blur into months. Months blur into years. The tray arrives, disappears, and returns again, always the same. Over time, some prisoners stop eating parts of their meals. Others hoard items not for hunger, but for a sense of control, saving bread, trading condiments, or creating crude routines just to feel human again. In a place where almost everything is taken away, even food becomes a psychological battleground. There are days when meals are the only reason to stand up. Other days, food becomes something to resist. Hunger strikes have been used as one of the few forms of protest available to Supermax inmates. Refusing food is sometimes the only way to express anger, despair, or desperation in a system that does not listen. The body becomes the message. And then there are disciplinary meals. In some systems, prisoners who break rules may be punished by being placed on restricted diets, bland, nutritionally sufficient, but intentionally unpleasant meals designed to enforce compliance. These meals are not about nutrition alone. They are about behavioral conditioning. Eat what you are given. Accept what you are handed. Resist, and it gets worse. Inside a Supermax, food is never just food. It is surveillance. Every tray is monitored. Uneaten items are noted. Tampering is punished. Even the act of eating is observed through cameras and narrow windows. Privacy does not exist, not even during the most basic human activity. And yet, outside those walls, most people imagine prison food as a joke, a meme, a punchline, something to laugh at from a distance. But inside isolation, food takes on a different weight. For prisoners locked away in near total solitude, meals are often tied directly to mental health. Poor appetite, disordered eating, and food-related rituals are common. When your world shrinks to 4 concrete walls, the contents of a plastic tray can feel overwhelmingly significant. A missing item can trigger rage. A delayed meal can cause panic. A cold tray can feel like an insult layered on top of isolation. The system understands this. That is why food schedules are strict. That is why variation is limited. That is why choice is removed. Predictability is control, and control is the foundation of Supermax confinement. But there is a deeper question hiding behind every tray that slides through that metal slot. What does it mean to feed someone you are intentionally isolating from humanity? Does providing calories fulfill responsibility, or does the way food is used reveal something more unsettling about punishment in modern America? When meals are stripped of dignity, flavor, and choice, are they still nourishment, or are they simply another tool in a system designed to break resistance? Inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, food tells a story most people never hear. A story not just about what prisoners eat, but about how power is exercised in silence. About how routine replaces compassion. About how something as ordinary as a meal can become a reminder that freedom, choice, and connection have been completely removed. This is not a story about recipes or menus. It is a story about control, isolation, and the psychological weight carried on a plastic tray, 3 times a day, every day, in a place where silence is louder than hunger. And once you understand what prison food is really like inside America's most isolated Supermax, you may never look at a meal or punishment the same way again. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. In America's most isolated Supermax prisons, food does not begin in a kitchen the way it does in the outside world. It begins in policy manuals, budget spreadsheets, and security protocols. Long before a meal reaches an inmate's cell, it has already passed through layers of administrative decision-making designed not around comfort or satisfaction, but around control, predictability, and risk elimination. Supermax prisons were never meant to operate like traditional correctional facilities. They were created as containment environments, places to house individuals considered too dangerous, too influential, or too disruptive to exist in the general prison population. Inside facilities such as ADX Florence, every system is engineered to reduce movement, interaction, and unpredictability. Food is no exception. In fact, it is one of the most tightly regulated systems in the entire institution. At the administrative level, Supermax food programs are designed around 3 core priorities: security, cost efficiency, and behavioral management. Nutrition matters only insofar as it meets minimum legal standards. Taste, variety, and cultural preference are secondary or ignored entirely. The objective is simple: provide enough calories to sustain life, while removing any element of pleasure or choice that could undermine institutional control. Menus are standardized months in advance. They rotate on rigid schedules, often repeating the same combinations of meals over and over again. This repetition is intentional. Familiarity reduces variables. When inmates know exactly what to expect, there is less room for protest, manipulation, or disruption. Even complaints lose their power when the answer is always the same. This is the menu. Unlike lower security prisons, where inmates may work in kitchens or serve food to one another, Supermax facilities eliminate inmate involvement almost entirely. Food preparation is handled by staff or by carefully selected low-risk workers under strict supervision. The fewer prisoners involved in food handling, the lower the perceived security risk. Every removed roll is another layer of control. Once prepared, meals are portioned with precision. Portions are measured, weighed, and packaged according to policy. Trays are designed to be durable, difficult to weaponize, and easy to monitor. Utensils, when provided at all, are often soft plastic and counted before and after each meal. In some cases, inmates eat with their hands, not because it is humane, but because it is safer. The delivery system is perhaps the most telling part of the entire process. In Supermax housing units, meals are delivered cell by cell, through narrow metal slots built into solid steel doors. These slots are engineered to open only wide enough for a tray to pass through. They close immediately after. There is no conversation, no eye contact. Often, the officer delivering the tray does not even pause long enough to acknowledge the person inside the cell. This design is not merely functional, it is symbolic. It reinforces separation. The inmate does not come to the food. The food comes to the inmate, under supervision, on schedule, without negotiation. The message is constant. You move only when allowed. You receive only what is given. Timing is critical. Meals arrive at the same times each day, often down to the minute. Any deviation, early, late, or skipped, is documented. For inmates, this schedule becomes the spine of existence. When everything else is stripped away, the arrival of a tray becomes a marker of time itself. Breakfast confirms morning. Dinner confirms survival. But that predictability cuts both ways. Because food schedules are so rigid, they can be used as leverage. Missed meals can escalate tension. Delays can trigger anxiety. Cold food, common in Supermax settings due to transport logistics, becomes an accepted norm, reinforcing the idea that comfort is not a priority. Complaints rarely go anywhere. The system is working as intended. The composition of Supermax meals reflects industrial efficiency rather than culinary care. Processed foods dominate. Shelf-stable items are favored because they reduce spoilage risks and simplify storage. Fresh fruits and vegetables are limited, not only due to cost, but because they can be altered, hidden, or misused. Everything served must be predictable, inspectable, and disposable. Flavor is sacrificed for uniformity. Seasoning is minimal. Condiments are restricted or removed entirely in certain units. Salt and pepper, small comforts in the free world, become privileges that may or may not exist. This blandness is not accidental. It reduces the emotional response tied to eating. Food becomes fuel, not pleasure. And yet, even fuel can be weaponized. Supermax systems often include disciplinary diets, nutritionally adequate but intentionally unpleasant meals used to punish infractions. These meals are bland, repetitive, and designed to reinforce authority. The purpose is not starvation, which would violate legal standards, but compliance. The body receives calories, the mind receives a warning. From the institution's perspective, this system is efficient. It minimizes costs, limits risk, and enforces order. From the inmate's perspective, it is dehumanizing. The act of eating, one of the most basic human rituals, is stripped of dignity, privacy, and choice. There is no sitting at a table, no sharing, no slowing down. Meals are eaten alone, often quickly, sometimes standing, sometimes crouched on a bunk in a cell barely large enough to stretch out. Over time, this environment changes how inmates relate to food itself. Some prisoners begin to eat mechanically, without appetite or enjoyment. Others develop rituals, saving certain items, arranging food in specific patterns, or eating at precise times, to create a sense of control. In a place where autonomy is nearly non-existent, even small food habits become acts of psychological survival. The institution observes these behaviors closely. Uneaten food is noted. Altered trays are flagged. Any attempt to modify, trade, or store food can result in discipline. Food is allowed only in the way the system permits it to exist. This constant observation reinforces a deeper reality of Supermax confinement. Nothing is neutral. Not movement. Not silence. Not food. Everything is a tool. Outside the walls, prison food is often reduced to jokes or stereotypes. But inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, food is a language, a silent one, used to communicate authority, compliance, and dominance. Each tray sliding through a metal slot carries more than calories. It carries a message. This is all you get, and this is how you get it. As days turn into months, and months into years, that message becomes internalized. Eating stops being about hunger. It becomes about endurance, about marking time, about surviving another day in a place designed to give you nothing beyond the bare minimum required to keep your body alive. And this is only the beginning. Because once the system is understood, the deeper question emerges. Not how Supermax prisons feed inmates, but how isolation reshapes the human relationship with food itself, turning nourishment into another layer of psychological confinement. Inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, hunger no longer behaves the way it does in the outside world. The body still requires food, but the mind, placed under relentless isolation, begins to reinterpret what hunger even means. Over time, eating is no longer driven by appetite or enjoyment. It becomes a psychological response to confinement itself. This transformation does not happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, quietly, day after day, inside concrete cells where silence is constant and human contact is nearly erased. In facilities such as ADX Florence, prisoners spend up to 23 hours a day alone. Some go days, weeks, or even months without speaking face-to-face with another person. In that environment, the brain adapts, but not in healthy ways. Sensory deprivation begins to alter perception, emotion, and bodily signals. Hunger is one of the first things to change. At first, many inmates experience heightened appetite. With nothing to do, nothing to see, and nothing to interact with, food becomes the most anticipated event of the day. The sound of keys in the hallway, the metallic scrape of the food slot opening, these become triggers. The brain releases anticipation chemicals not because the food is appealing, but because it represents something happening. A break in monotony, proof that time is still moving. But this phase rarely lasts. As isolation stretches on, appetite often begins to fade. The brain, deprived of stimulation, starts conserving energy. Depression sets in. Anxiety becomes constant. The body no longer signals hunger in the same way. Meals arrive, but the desire to eat weakens. Some inmates describe eating simply because they know they must, not because they want to. Others begin skipping meals entirely, staring at the tray without touching it. This is where isolation turns food into a psychological mirror. In Supermax confinement, eating is one of the few remaining choices a prisoner can make. You cannot choose where to go. You cannot choose who to see. You cannot choose when to sleep or when lights turn on. But you can choose whether to eat. For some inmates, refusing food becomes a way to reclaim agency. Not eating is no longer about hunger, it is about control. Over time, this leads to distorted eating behaviors. Some prisoners eat compulsively, finishing every item on the tray even when they feel physically ill, simply because food is scarce in variety and meaning. Others ration their meals, saving items for later not out of necessity, but to create structure. Bread might be saved until night. A dessert item might be eaten last, stretched out to prolong the experience. These rituals are not about taste, they are about anchoring the mind. In a world with no variation, routine becomes survival. Isolation also intensifies emotional responses tied to food. A missing item can feel like a personal attack. A cold meal can trigger disproportionate anger. A delayed tray can cause panic. When the mind has nothing else to focus on, small disruptions feel enormous. The food tray becomes emotionally loaded in ways that would seem irrational outside prison. But inside isolation, it makes perfect sense. Psychologists who have studied long-term solitary confinement note that sensory deprivation alters how the brain processes reward. Dopamine pathways weaken. Pleasure responses flatten. This means that even when food is consumed, it no longer produces satisfaction. The act of eating becomes mechanical. Chew, swallow, repeat. The brain registers calories, but not comfort. This is why many long-term Supermax inmates report losing interest in food altogether. Meals become obligations rather than experiences. The tray arrives. It is eaten quickly or not at all. There is no joy, no anticipation, no memory attached. Food becomes as empty as the cell itself. And when food loses meaning, something deeply human erodes with it. But for others, the opposite happens. Some inmates begin to obsess over food. They replay past meals from their lives before prison. They imagine recipes. They dream about specific tastes, textures, and smells. Food memories become mental escapes, vivid and detailed. In isolation, the mind clings to anything that reminds it of humanity, and food is one of the strongest memory anchors we have. These imagined meals can become more real than the tray in front of them. This split between loss of appetite and food obsession is common in extreme isolation. Both are symptoms of the same problem. The brain struggling to adapt to an environment it was never meant to endure. Supermax systems do not intervene in these changes unless they become disruptive. As long as an inmate consumes enough calories to survive, the system considers the problem solved. Mental health deterioration tied to eating behavior is rarely addressed unless it leads to self-harm or medical emergencies. And this neglect compounds the damage. Over long periods, altered eating patterns contribute to weight loss, nutritional deficiencies, gastrointestinal problems, and weakened immune systems. But the psychological consequences are often worse. Food becomes disconnected from pleasure, nourishment, and social bonding. It becomes transactional, something done to maintain existence, not to support well-being. Even hunger strikes, one of the few forms of protest available, reveal how deeply food is tied to power inside Supermax prisons. When inmates refuse meals, the institution responds not with dialogue, but with protocols, monitoring, medical evaluations, force-feeding threats in extreme cases. The message is clear, even refusal is controlled. In this environment, eating or not eating becomes a language, one spoken entirely through the body. The tragedy is that none of this is accidental. Supermax confinement is designed to strip away stimulation, autonomy, and connection. The psychological changes that follow, including distorted relationships with food, are not side effects. They are consequences of a system built around isolation as punishment. By the time years have passed, many inmates no longer remember what normal hunger feels like. Appetite cues are dulled. Satisfaction is unfamiliar. Meals are endured, not enjoyed. Food no longer connects them to culture, memory, or pleasure. It simply keeps the body functioning inside a space meant to suppress the mind. And when isolation finally ends, if it ever does, the damage does not disappear overnight. Former Supermax inmates often struggle to eat normally in social settings. Cafeterias feel overwhelming. Choices feel stressful. Noise and conversation during meals can trigger anxiety. The mind, conditioned to eat alone in silence, does not easily relearn how to share food with others. This is the hidden cost of Supermax food systems. They do not just feed people in isolation. They train the human brain to survive without connection, without pleasure, and without choice. They rewrite hunger itself. And as we move forward, the question becomes even more unsettling. Not just how isolation changes eating behavior, but how the use of food as control reshapes identity, dignity, and the meaning of survival inside America's most isolated prisons. Inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, food is never neutral. It is not simply sustenance delivered 3 times a day to keep the body alive. It is a mechanism of power, quiet, bureaucratic, and relentless. In a system built to eliminate choice, movement, and human contact, food becomes one of the most effective tools for enforcing obedience without ever raising a voice. To understand this, you have to understand the philosophy of Supermax confinement itself. Supermax prisons are not designed for rehabilitation. They are designed for management. Their primary purpose is to contain individuals deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, or too uncontrollable for any other environment. Inside facilities like ADX Florence, control is achieved not through constant physical force, but through total environmental dominance. Every aspect of life, light, sound, temperature, movement, communication, and food is regulated. Food sits at the center of this system because it is unavoidable. You can take away recreation. You can take away visits. You can take away programs, work assignments, and privileges. But you cannot take away food entirely without crossing legal boundaries. That makes food uniquely powerful. It must be given, but how it is given, what is given, and when it is given can all be manipulated. This is where food transforms into discipline. In Supermax prisons, behavioral compliance is often enforced through incremental restrictions rather than dramatic punishment. An inmate may lose access to commissary items. Condiments may be removed. Portions may become more monotonous. Certain meal components may disappear. Each step is justified as policy. Each step is framed as consequence. Together, they send a clear message: behavior determines comfort. Even when calories remain technically sufficient, the experience of eating can be deliberately degraded. One of the most controversial examples of this is the use of restricted or disciplinary diets. These meals are designed to meet basic nutritional requirements while being intentionally bland, repetitive, and unpleasant. The ingredients are chosen for efficiency, not enjoyment. Texture, flavor, and presentation are irrelevant. The point is not nourishment, it is correction. From an administrative perspective, these meals are tools of compliance. They allow staff to respond to rule violations without physical confrontation. From an inmate's perspective, they are a form of psychological punishment layered on top of isolation. Because in Supermax confinement, food is already stripped of dignity. When it is further reduced, the message becomes unmistakable: Resistance leads to deprivation. But discipline through food does not only happen through formal punishment. It happens through uncertainty. In an environment where meals are the primary markers of time, any disruption to the food schedule has psychological impact. A delayed tray, a missing item, a meal served cold or incomplete. Even when these disruptions are accidental, they are rarely perceived that way by inmates. In isolation, the mind searches for meaning in everything. Food irregularities are interpreted as signals of authority, retaliation, or warning. This ambiguity amplifies control. Inmates quickly learn that complaining about food often leads nowhere, or worse, draws attention. Silence becomes survival. Eating what is given, when it is given, without comment, becomes the safest path. Over time, this trains compliance at a deep psychological level. Not because inmates agree with the system, but because resistance feels futile. Food also becomes leverage in more subtle ways. Access to commissary items, snacks, instant meals, drink mixes can temporarily soften the harshness of Supermax confinement. These items introduce flavor, choice, and variety into an otherwise rigid diet. But commissary access is conditional. It can be limited, suspended, or revoked entirely. The result is a two-tier food reality, the base diet and the slightly less oppressive version reserved for compliant behavior. This creates internal pressure. Inmates know that even minor infractions can result in losing the only food-related autonomy they have. This discourages not only rule-breaking, but also self-expression. When food is one of the few remaining comforts, protecting access to it becomes a priority. Compliance is incentivized not through reward, but through fear of further deprivation. The system does not need to threaten. It simply adjusts. Over time, this dynamic reshapes how inmates view authority. Power is no longer associated with visible force. It is associated with invisible systems, menus, schedules, and policies that quietly dictate survival. The tray becomes a symbol of institutional dominance, delivered without words, without explanation, and without appeal. Even protest is absorbed into this framework. Hunger strikes, historically used as a form of resistance, are tightly managed in Supermax environments. Inmates who refuse meals are monitored, documented, and evaluated. Medical protocols replace dialogue. The refusal to eat is treated not as communication, but as a problem to be managed. In extreme cases, the state may intervene to preserve life, not out of compassion, but obligation. This response neutralizes protest by reframing it. The body becomes the battleground, but the institution controls the terms. Even refusal does not escape the system's reach. What makes this especially damaging is that food-based discipline often operates below public awareness. It does not leave bruises. It does not generate dramatic footage. It does not provoke immediate outrage. It happens quietly, tray by tray, policy by policy. From the outside, everything appears orderly. Inside, the psychological weight accumulates. For inmates already living in near-total isolation, this additional layer of control compounds stress, anxiety, and helplessness. Food stops being a source of nourishment and becomes a daily reminder of power imbalance. The act of eating reinforces submission. The absence of choice reinforces dependency. And yet, the system frames this as necessary. Administrators argue that strict food control reduces contraband, prevents violence, and maintains order. And in a purely operational sense, it often does. But the human cost is rarely measured. There are no metrics for dignity lost, no spreadsheets tracking psychological erosion, no line item for what it means to turn a basic human need into an instrument of punishment. Over years of confinement, this dynamic reshapes identity. Inmates internalize the idea that they do not deserve comfort. That pleasure is dangerous. That choice leads to punishment. These beliefs do not disappear when confinement ends. Former Supermax prisoners often struggle to assert preferences, make decisions, or enjoy simple comforts without guilt or anxiety. What began as a disciplinary tool inside prison continues to shape behavior long after release. This is the silent efficiency of Supermax systems. They do not rely on chaos or brutality. They rely on structure, on repetition, on making control feel inevitable. Food, predictable, unavoidable, and emotionally charged, fits perfectly into this design. And as long as meals continue to arrive on schedule, through steel slots, without conversation or choice. The system appears humane on paper. Calories are delivered. Bodies survive. But survival is not the same as dignity. And in the next chapter, we confront an even deeper question. What happens when a system that uses food as control begins to redefine what humane treatment? On paper, the food served inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons meets the requirements. Calories are calculated. Nutrients are logged. Menus are approved by dietitians. Regulations are followed. From a distance, the system appears compliant, clinical, and sufficient. But inside the concrete reality of Supermax confinement, survival on paper does not always translate to health in the body. Supermax prisons are designed to sustain life, not to support wellness. This distinction matters more than most people realize. Nutrition inside these facilities is structured around minimum standards, what is legally required to prevent starvation and acute deficiency, not what is necessary to maintain long-term physical and mental health under extreme isolation. And isolation changes everything. In places like ADX Florence, inmates are confined to small cells for up to 23 hours a day, often for years at a time. Physical movement is severely limited. Exposure to sunlight is minimal. Stress levels are chronically elevated. Sleep is frequently disrupted by lighting, noise, or routine checks. In this environment, the body's nutritional needs shift, but the food system does not adapt. Instead, it remains rigid. Most Supermax meals are built around processed, shelf-stable foods. These items are cost-effective, easy to store, and simple to distribute. But they are also typically high in sodium, low in fresh fiber, and limited in vitamins that degrade over time. Fresh fruits and vegetables appear sparingly. Whole foods are rare. Variety is minimal. On a calorie chart, the numbers add up. In the body, the consequences accumulate. One of the most common physical outcomes reported by long-term Supermax inmates is digestive distress. Chronic constipation, bloating, acid reflux, and stomach pain are widespread. Diets low in fresh fiber and high in processed carbohydrates disrupt gut health, especially when combined with near-total inactivity. Over time, these issues become normalized, treated as inevitable rather than preventable. Weight changes are another silent indicator. Some inmates lose significant weight, especially those whose appetite has been suppressed by depression, anxiety, or sensory deprivation. Others gain weight despite limited portions, due to metabolic changes triggered by inactivity and stress. The body, locked into survival mode, conserves energy differently. Muscles weaken. Fat distribution shifts. Physical fitness declines even when calorie intake appears adequate. Micronutrient deficiencies are harder to see, but no less damaging. Limited exposure to sunlight contributes to vitamin D deficiency, which affects bone health, immune function, and mood regulation. Diets low in fresh produce reduce intake of vitamins A, C, and K, as well as essential minerals. Over time, these deficiencies can weaken immune systems, slow wound healing, and exacerbate chronic conditions. But inside Supermax prisons, medical care often responds only to acute symptoms. Routine nutritional monitoring is rare. Blood tests are not standard unless a serious issue arises. Subtle deficiencies go unnoticed for years. When inmates report fatigue, dizziness, or persistent pain, the response is often minimal: over-the-counter medication, brief observation, and return to the cell. The system is not designed to investigate root causes. It is designed to manage complaints. The physical toll of Supermax food systems becomes even more pronounced when combined with the psychological stress of isolation. Chronic stress alters hormone levels, increases inflammation, and disrupts digestion. Appetite signals become unreliable. The body struggles to process nutrients efficiently. Even a nutritionally adequate meal may not be fully absorbed under constant stress. This creates a feedback loop. Poor nutrition worsens mental health. Declining mental health further suppresses appetite or encourages disordered eating. Disordered eating exacerbates physical decline. And because everything happens behind closed doors, the deterioration remains largely invisible. Dental health is another overlooked casualty. Limited access to fresh foods, combined with diets heavy in starches and sugars, accelerates tooth decay. Dental care in Supermax settings is often delayed or restricted due to security concerns. Pain becomes something to endure rather than treat. Eating becomes difficult, which further alters nutrition and reinforces avoidance. Even hydration is not guaranteed to be optimal. Water access is controlled. Some inmates limit fluid intake to avoid frequent bathroom use in cramped cells or to reduce interactions with staff. Dehydration compounds digestive issues, headaches, and fatigue. Again, the system records water availability, not water consumption. All of this exists within a framework that insists standards are being met. From an administrative standpoint, compliance is defined by checklists. Calories served, menus approved, medical visits logged. But health is not experienced in spreadsheets. It is experienced in bodies confined, stressed, and fed by a system that prioritizes order over care. The long-term consequences do not end at the prison gate. Former Supermax inmates often leave with compromised health, weakened immune systems, chronic digestive disorders, vitamin deficiencies, and disrupted eating patterns. Relearning how to eat normally, how to listen to hunger cues, enjoy food, and nourish the body can take years. Some never fully recover. What makes this especially troubling is that these outcomes are not the result of neglect alone. They are the predictable result of combining extreme isolation with minimalistic nutrition over long periods of time. The system does not need to be intentionally cruel to be harmful. It only needs to be indifferent. Food inside Supermax prisons keeps people alive. That is true, but survival is not health. Health requires stimulation, movement, sunlight, variety, and care. Supermax confinement removes most of these factors while maintaining the illusion of adequacy through regulated meals. The body survives, but it does so under strain, adapting to conditions that slowly erode resilience. This raises a critical question, one that extends beyond menus and calories. If a system knowingly places human beings in conditions that undermine physical health over time, while technically meeting legal standards, where does responsibility truly lie? Is compliance enough? Or does humane treatment require more than keeping the body alive inside a concrete box? As we move forward, this question becomes impossible to ignore, because once the physical toll is understood, the conversation must shift from what is allowed to what is right. Inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, food does more than sustain the body. Over time, it reshapes identity. It quietly rewires how a person understands dignity, autonomy, and even their own worth. This transformation does not happen through violence or chaos. It happens through repetition, through thousands of meals eaten alone, without choice, without voice, and without meaning. In environments such as ADX Florence, inmates are not only confined physically, they are confined psychologically. Every aspect of daily life is predetermined, and food is one of the most powerful reinforcements of that reality. When a person has no say in what they eat, when they eat, or how they eat, the message sinks in slowly but deeply. Your preferences do not matter. At first, many inmates resist this message internally. They complain. They compare meals. They remember food from the outside world, family dinners, street food, celebrations, cultural dishes tied to identity and memory. In the early stages of confinement, these memories act as anchors, reminders of a self that existed before the cell. But isolation is patient. As months turn into years, resistance gives way to adaptation. Complaints fade, not because conditions improve, but because hope of change erodes. The mind begins to conserve energy. Emotional reactions flatten. Food becomes something endured rather than experienced. The act of eating loses its connection to pleasure, culture, and choice. This is where dignity begins to erode. In the free world, food is deeply tied to identity. What you eat, how you eat, and who you eat with all reflect values, culture, and personal history. In Supermax confinement, those connections are severed. Everyone eats the same meals, alone, in silence, through steel doors. Individuality is erased one tray at a time. Even the posture of eating changes. Meals are consumed standing, crouched, or sitting on a narrow bunk. There is no table, no shared space, no ritual beyond survival. Over time, the body learns to eat quickly, defensively, without attention. This posture carries meaning. It reinforces a sense of unworthiness, as if comfort itself is undeserved. And because food is one of the few remaining constants, this message is reinforced daily. Identity also shifts through learned helplessness. When every decision is removed, the brain adapts by lowering expectations. Inmates stop thinking in terms of preference and begin thinking in terms of availability. Do I like this? Becomes irrelevant. The only question that remains is this what I'm given? Over time, this mindset spreads beyond food into other areas of thought. This is how institutionalization deepens. The longer a person lives under total control, the harder it becomes to imagine autonomy. Food, once a source of self-expression, becomes a reminder of dependence. Eating reinforces submission, not because inmates agree with the system, but because survival demands adaptation. This internal shift has long-term consequences. Former Supermax inmates often describe feeling overwhelmed by choice after release. Menus in restaurants feel stressful. Grocery stores feel chaotic. Being asked, "What do you want to eat?" triggers anxiety rather than excitement. Choice, once stripped away, does not automatically feel liberating when it returns. Some struggle with guilt when eating freely. Others eat mechanically, without pleasure, long after release. Years of conditioning do not disappear overnight. The body may be free, but the habits of confinement remain. Social eating can be especially difficult. Sharing meals requires trust, conversation, and presence, skills that atrophy in isolation. Former inmates may eat quickly, avoid eye contact, or prefer eating alone even in safe environments. The table, once a place of connection, becomes unfamiliar territory. This is the unseen legacy of Supermax food systems. They do not simply affect inmates during confinement. They shape how people re-enter society, how they relate to others, and how they see themselves. Food becomes a site of tension rather than comfort, a reminder of control rather than care. Dignity is not something that disappears all at once. It erodes gradually, through systems that reduce human needs to technical requirements. Calories are delivered, standards are met, but the human experience is diminished. Inside Supermax prisons, food teaches inmates powerful lessons. That pleasure is dangerous. That choice leads to punishment. That silence is safer than expression. That needs should be minimized. These lessons do not stay behind bars. They travel with people into re-entry programs, halfway houses, and family homes. They surface in small ways: skipped meals, rigid routines, discomfort with hospitality. Loved ones may not understand why a simple dinner feels complicated. The answer lies in years of eating under control. This raises a deeper ethical question. If a system knowingly uses food to reinforce submission, erase individuality, and condition dependence, can it truly be considered humane, no matter how well it meets technical standards? At what point does efficiency cross into erosion of personhood? Supermax prisons often defend their practices by pointing to safety and necessity. And it is true that these facilities house individuals who have committed serious acts or posed serious risks. But punishment does not exist in a vacuum. The methods used to enforce control shape outcomes far beyond the prison walls. When food becomes a tool of dominance rather than care, it leaves a mark. The tragedy is that this damage is largely invisible to the public. There are no dramatic images, no viral footage, just trays sliding through slots, day after day, year after year. From the outside, it looks orderly. From the inside, it feels like slow erasure. And yet, understanding this does not require sympathy for crimes or excuses for harm. It requires acknowledging a simple truth. How a society feeds the people it isolates reveals how it understands punishment, responsibility, and humanity itself. Food is never just food. Inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, it is identity stripped down to calories, dignity reduced to compliance, survival measured not by health or wholeness, but by endurance. And once that transformation is complete, the most difficult journey begins, not surviving isolation, but relearning how to live as a person again. When people imagine prison food, they often picture bad taste, small portions, or cheap ingredients. A joke, a stereotype, something distant and easy to dismiss. But after understanding what food truly represents inside America's most isolated Supermax prisons, that image no longer holds. Because inside these places, food is not a side detail of punishment. It is punishment, quietly delivered, 3 times a day. A plastic tray sliding through a steel slot may look harmless from the outside. There is no shouting, no violence, no visible cruelty. And yet, that tray carries with it years of psychological weight. It carries routine where there should be dignity, control where there should be care, silence where there should be human connection. Inside isolation, food becomes time itself. It becomes the clock, the calendar, the proof that another day has passed without change. It becomes the only event in a day designed to have no events. And when that food is stripped of choice, variety, warmth, and meaning, it quietly teaches the person eating it something powerful. Your comfort does not matter. This is how Supermax systems work, not through chaos, but through precision. They do not need to brutalize openly. They only need to standardize, to regulate, to repeat. Over time, repetition does what force cannot. It reshapes identity. It trains compliance. It reduces expectations. It conditions the mind to survive without asking for more. And the most unsettling part is that all of this happens while rules are followed. Calories are counted. Menus are approved. Legal standards are met. On paper, everything is acceptable. But human experience does not live on paper. It lives in bodies and minds locked in small concrete rooms, eating alone, day after day, year after year. What we've seen throughout this documentary is that Supermax food systems do more than keep people alive. They teach lessons. They teach that choice is dangerous, that pleasure is unnecessary, that silence is safer than expression, that survival is enough, even when dignity is gone. And those lessons do not end when confinement ends. They follow people out of the cell and into the world, into grocery stores that feel overwhelming, into dinner tables that feel unfamiliar, into lives where choice no longer feels natural and comfort feels undeserved. The body leaves isolation, but the conditioning remains. This is not about defending crimes. It is not about denying harm. It is about asking a harder question, one that society often avoids. What does it mean to punish someone by slowly erasing their relationship with basic human needs? What does it say about justice when a system is satisfied with survival, but indifferent to what survival costs? Food is one of the most human things we share. It connects us to family, culture, memory, and care. When it is reduced to a tool of control, it reveals something deeper about how power is exercised and how quietly it can shape a person from the inside out. Supermax prisons are designed to disappear people from public view. But disappearance does not mean absence. What happens inside those walls does not stay there. It echoes through bodies, through behavior, through lives trying to reconnect with the world after years of enforced silence. So the next time prison food is mentioned casually or laughed off as a joke, remember what that tray actually represents in places of extreme isolation. Remember that punishment does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives quietly, on schedule, through a steel door. And understanding that truth forces us to confront a reality that is uncomfortable, but necessary to face. Because how a society feeds the people it isolates tells us exactly how it understands power, punishment, and humanity. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.